I will just introduce the panel. We've got Tim Boyd, our international president. I know you don't know that. And we've got Dorothy Bell, who is international speaker and also educationist as well. Thank you. And John Vorstermans, our national president of the TS in New Zealand. And we'll jump straight into the first question. This was asked of Tim. The habit of dying. People with starting Alzheimer's dementia, half of the personality is gone, eyes are not bright, pathways in the brain are scrambled, they will die. How do we help them?
Again, Alzheimer's is one of those very tricky things that seems to be spreading really throughout the population for various reasons. But really, in a sense, as it becomes more profound, it's something where there is, in fact, a separation between the personality, you could say, and the soul's ability to influence this body, this memory. And so there's some difficulties that are posed with that. But, you know, I think the universal solvent for whatever the condition may be is whatever degree we're capable of sending and not just projecting, but feeling and being in a state of love. That's something that has the greatest healing potential across the board. Obviously, sometimes it's quite challenging with people who you have had a relationship with over a lifetime, perhaps. And you look in your eyes and you look in their eyes, you don't see them there. You stand in their presence after decades of relationship and they don't know who you are. It's challenging. But it's one of the many challenges that we face, that the only option in some conditions is to love that person as unconditionally as is possible for us. And that's the thing, that no matter who it is, no matter what it is, everything responds to that. That doesn't mean that it reverses the condition, but there is a response.
I'd just like to add a personal experience with my father. And thank you, Tim, you've covered it very well. What I learned to do was to forget myself and my issues and in seeing him as he was. And the other thing was to go with him whatever he was talking about. One afternoon I came into the hospital and he was a little bit agitated. He didn't recognise who I was, but he knew I was someone familiar, and he tried to get out of bed. And he had broken his hips. That's the way he was going to go out, I thought. So he was trying to get out of bed. I knew that was hopeless. So I said, "What are you doing, Pop?" And he said, "I've got to get down to the shearing shed. I've got to get the shearing shed ready because the shearers are coming." And I said, "Oh, okay, yeah. But hang on, I just saw Albert." Now, Albert was his brother who worked the farm. They worked the farm together. So I said, "But he's doing that. He's getting that ready, so you've got no need to go down there and check up." So I kind of just went with him, and I thought that was the best thing I could do. And he settled down, because the aim was he couldn't get out of bed. He had a broken hip and he was under morphine and pain. So that was going with him as it was.
When my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's last year, a very dear friend of mine said to me, after being very upset of hearing the news, "What an amazing gift your mother is giving to you all." And I had to really think about that and see it in another way. And it does make you think. So I'll move on to question 2. Now this question is directed to you, Dorothy. In your opening talk, you portrayed an inner network linked by vibrational frequency. Do you envisage that this will become a critical mass to tip the balance of human consciousness into a new paradigm? Please expand on your idea.
Right. Just to put that in context, I'll just take a little extract out of my talk when I referred to it. I had been quite moved by Annie Besant's vision of a new civilization, and she had envisaged a model, a physical community living together and sowing the seeds for this new civilization built on KH's new continent of thought, which symbolised the ancient wisdom teachings. And it was like a miniature model to sow the seeds for this future civilization. But I asked these questions of myself. Wonder how it was relevant today, this vision. And what if her vision, I asked, because I thought about it and reflected on it, what if this vision was already in process of being formed at the inner level, not the outer level physically, but at the inner level, and working towards an inner enlightened civilization, a massive consciousness that would be a spiritual force. And this inner network, which is referred to in the question, it's a collective which is being formed unconsciously as the people involved applied the wisdom teachings and were preparing the ground for the unfolding of spiritual consciousness. In other words, upping their vibrational frequency, climbing the golden stairs, etc. We know the symbols. And what if this operational network were linked at the inner level purely by the vibrational frequency? They wouldn't be aware of what it was or who was involved. So that's the background to that question. And it would be a spiritual force. I made that statement. It would be undivided, naturally formed. No membership forms, no dues to be paid. It would happen unconsciously and naturally, but at the inner level. Okay, and the hallmark of these people, of course, would be altruism with a great love for the welfare of humanity. And this was how they would be inwardly connected. This was the hallmark that produced their vibrational frequency from their outer work and their inner work on themselves. So the question then relates to, do I see this as a possible a future thing where the critical mass could in fact bring in a new paradigm? I have a saying, all things are possible, and possibly all things may already be manifesting, who knows. But there is a need for a very positive thinking in the world today, and to think that this is not only a possibility, but there are these forces at work that we can contribute to as we work on ourselves. So I say, yes, I believe. I do not say it will happen, I just believe it is a possibility, hopefully a probability. And was there a second part of that? Expanding on the idea. I am aware, I want to say something, it's not an easy thing. This group, whoever they are and will be, would be in a sort of a oneness of the same kind of energy, a spiritual force. But to remember there's, under this big oneness I referred to, there are many little groups of onenesses forming, and they're not all, could say, a spiritual positive force. There may be other things that will be mitigating in terms of the challenges of this inner group. So I just wanted to alert you to the fact it's not totally roses and wine, or wine and roses, but it's like it is and can be a very strong spiritual force in a world there is so much darkness in terms of fear-mongering and people who are very fearful. And so these sorts of strategies that are being used in the world, we need to be aware that we can do something ourselves, is to work out our own negativities, dropping one negative thought a day, one refraining from criticism and judgment. That's an easy way to go. And when you find yourself falling in the little trap, that I said to someone today, don't bash yourself up, just have a little laugh about it and say, at least I'm aware of it. So it's that's the way we keep our vibrational frequency healthy, wealthy and wise. Yes.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to add? John?
Yeah, looking at it from perhaps a slightly different perspective, is that in the Theosophical Society, what prompts us to join? Is it the same sort of idea of a spiritual community? So our first object, for me, represents the idea of forming a community. So it points to forming the nucleus of a universal brotherhood, which in a sense is a reflection of what I perceive where the Mahatmas are working from, or from our spiritual soul, our higher nature, or our Atla Buddhic perspective, which is where we're all aiming to wake up for. So I believe at a deeper level, perhaps some people might call it the soul level, we agreed to come here and become part of this society. Yet, at a personality level, the development of this universal brotherhood is a real challenge. And when you agree to join these sort of groups, like Dorothy was speaking of, spiritual community, or the Theosophical Society, you're challenged right up face to face. You can't avoid everything except the universal brotherhood in a sense. So you're being challenged to find out and to be this brotherhood. But to do that, all this stuff that's within your personality has to be dealt with, has to come out. So you get challenged with it as part of the process. So you hear the comment, or I hear the comment sometimes, look, you're an organisation that professes universal brotherhood, and you might come in here and all I see is arguments and disagreements. But I tend to say that this is natural. We're not the universal brotherhood. We're trying to create a universal brotherhood at this level. And part of this means we have to deal with the stuff that we're coming across. We have to learn about non-judgment, about respect for different opinions, etc., etc. So this is I see all this as a process. So at a higher level, we may have made that decision. At a personality level, we don't remember that. And we have to deal with all the stuff that comes up.
And I think what John and Dorothy have had to say is right on point. I would just point out one other thing. In like the Dalai Lama tradition, or even the Theosophical tradition, there's this idea of the movement of consciousness. Great consciousnesses all pass from one body to the next. So you have one Dalai Lama, another. And so part of the idea that I think Annie Besant was very much tapping into with the idea of the coming of a world teacher and the promotion of Krishnamurti in this way is something that I think we perhaps need to look at in a slightly different way, perhaps, because I do believe that our customary way of looking at things is that we look to a person to represent this consciousness. So a Jesus, a Buddha, a Maitreya, whoever it is that is prophesied to be the next one. But actually in the actual tradition, and it seems as if in the way things perhaps work, that a consciousness need not be individualized in one person's body. So we tend to look for the great man, and it's always the great man that we look for to rescue the moment. But what we really are looking for is that consciousness that will overshadow those of us who are capable of becoming in tune with it. So the idea of a network of people through which this one consciousness is working probably is something that is so vast that it cannot work through one individual. And so the work that we find ourselves doing in these theosophical attempts and other attempts is to refine ourselves, to learn how to drop away the barriers that prevent the flow of this. And so this network and this tipping point, really we play a great role in that. You know, you do not have to be the recognized head of anything in order to participate in this expanded consciousness that's attempting to make itself available to humanity at this critical time.
Thank you. Our third question is addressed to Tim. Please expand on your idea in your talk on Aliyah that spiritual movements have their roots in the Theosophical Society or Theosophy.
In that instance, I was just noting how, particularly now in the academic communities around the world, those who have some interest in what they would describe as contemporary spiritual movements. So you have a host of them now. In 1875, you did not. And so many of the various movements that we find in every city and town of the world these days that might call themselves either New Age or contemporary spiritual basis, every one of them inevitably draws on this context that is theosophy. Generally what it is that they emphasize some aspect of that. Oftentimes they can emphasize an aspect of it better than we can within the Theosophical Society. So for instance, in the US, you have a group called IONS. I should know it because I know all those people, but I can't. Institute of Noetic Sciences, who have done a great deal of work scientifically grounding some of these demonstrations of the workings of consciousness. They have laboratories, they have many, many things that the Theosophical Society does not. That's a wonderful work. But it illustrates an aspect of this greater context which theosophy can provide. And people are becoming aware, particularly in the academic community, that today, any one of those groups, and I know many of the heads of those groups that have popped up all around the world, any one of them will tell you that our roots trace back to this opening that occurred in the presentation of this theosophical worldview that was reintroduced in 1875 and has grown since.
Thank you. Anyone like to add anything? Okay. Question 4. What is the difference between awareness and mindfulness? And at the end of the question there was a statement. The mind is full, but should be empty for intuition to come in.
I believe they're somewhat similar, really. An awareness, for me, simply is the same as consciousness. Consciousness in the manifested world is conditioned through whatever it manifests. So it's conditioned through me as a human being. And if I'm focused in my mind, it's all over the place. As I'm sure you all realise if you ever tried to meditate. So the idea of mindfulness is a Buddhist concept. And it's endeavouring to take us really to a space which is observing what's going on in the mind, being aware of what's going on in the mind. So for me it takes you to a level beyond the mind, the observer, which is sometimes called the observer. The observer which observes what's going on in our life. So mindfulness for me means, moving my awareness out of the mind, but still being aware of what's going on in the mind. Okay.
I'd just like to comment that many, spiritual teachers use these words, and I would advise to look at the context in which they are used in terms of their philosophy. And the point about mindfulness to me first came up with, of course, the Eightfold Path with the Buddha, and it was seen as a part of a whole, I won't say bunch of, but right way of viewing was the first step, and the right intention, right action, right speech, action, it went through. So you have a whole package of behaviours or practices which make up a road towards enlightenment. I don't think it guarantees enlightenment, but it is a necessary way towards that. So mindfulness and that being aware of what's maybe in front of you, a constant awareness and constant attention to that, as well as, if you like, meditation as being aware of what's going on inside one, that these are part and parcel of an overall pathway towards an enlightened situation.
Just quickly, the way I would see it, mindfulness, awareness is a product of mindfulness. When we are mindful, a certain awareness arises. And I wouldn't fully agree with what was said at the end about the mind being empty.
The mind is full but should be empty for intuition to come in. That was a statement at the end of the question.
Well, what I would suggest is this, that one of the things we do need to become aware of, part of this awareness process, is the nature of the mind. When we talk about the mind being empty, that's an impossibility. In the sense of, this cup, it can have water. If there's no water, it's filled with air. There's always something there. The contents of the mind are the distractor. But the nature of the mind, similar to if we studied this cup, we would study its shape, its function, its capacities. A similar sort of approach. The mind will always be filled with something. Thoughts will always be in the atmosphere. It's like saying your lungs are empty. So it's misplaced effort to attempt to empty the mind, because it's the nature of a vacuum that it attracts something else to itself. So you'll be emptying it forever. And that'll be where you'll end up, and you'll learn from that. But the nature of the mind, not its content.
This next question is asked by James Fox. He put his name on his questions. So Ruth will be able to take that back to James if she's still here. It appears that there are many paths to enlightenment, nirvana, spiritual unfoldment, etc., some of which we've touched on in Richard's talk on Jnana Yoga. So do you think it is necessary to know about, study the ancient wisdom as presented through the theosophical writings to achieve this state? Or, put it another way, would it be reasonable to view the Theosophical Society as a place where one can discover and or explore one of the many paths to enlightenment, nirvana, spiritual unfoldment, etc., one of which, of course, would require or involve a study of the ancient wisdom as presented through the theosophical writings?
Okay, good question, James. I always loved Krishnamurti's statement that truth is a pathless land, or the way to truth is a pathless land. There is no one way. Everyone has to find their own way to whatever you want to call it, the finding of truth or nirvana, etc. There's no formula to get there. And the whole idea of, I guess, our second object in our society is to explore comparative religion, philosophies and science, to give us some sort of understanding, not of a path, but of the wisdom within these different areas, which might give us an inkling of the way to travel. It's like, a guru isn't the one to tell you what you have to do, but but is an example of someone who's reached that space. So he's a guru, he or she has taken a journey to become wise. But if I took the same journey as him, the chances are I wouldn't get wise, because my experiences in life are quite different. So whether you have to sort of be willing to explore that yourself. You know, certainly the Theosophical Society has many writings and teachings that you can explore, but it's no different from perhaps reading things outside the Theosophical Society, study things from outside the society. There's no exclusive set of material that's necessarily going to take you there. The Theosophical Society has a focus in some respects on the inner journey, and also it has a very good set of literature on the study of comparative religion that are worth considering as part of your journey. But I would look much wider in my search, because it's nothing is contained within one form or another form. I'm a great advocate that everyone should read The Secret Doctrine. Some people think it's a mad thing to do, but when you read The Secret Doctrine, the information taken there is taken from sources from all the sacred writings around the world. And that, to me, is a good example of perhaps what we should do in our study through knowledge and understanding. And that's what I believe, James's question is leading towards, that, we shouldn't limit our study just to theosophical authors, in my view.
Thank you. Dorothy?
Thank you. I'd just like to add that Annie Besant made a statement in her book Initiation that I read very early in my late career in Theosophy, in the TS, and she made the very bold statement, there are many, many names given to the path, and she listed a few from the Hindu tradition, the Christian tradition, and others, and she said, but the path is one. So that sort of shook me a little bit, and I had to sort of reflect on that. But the point was, it actually involves this, what do you call it, the unfolding process, and the impediments to be removed. But the way it is done, the practices that are used, the context in which it happens may vary, but it's like the path is one. It's the same goal at the top of the mountain, lots of pathways going up to that particular peak.
Thank you. Now the next question. In light of the Earth's recent encounter with the unidentified cigar-shaped object Umayamaya, does the TS have an official position on extraterrestrial life? Is there a place for ET investigation within the TS? Tim? I'm getting to the point now.
International president. I have no awareness about the phenomenon that's being spoken of, but certainly within the TS there are people who are very actively interested in matters relating to other forms of intelligence beyond and perhaps populating the Earth as well. So that's about what I can say. There is no policy on what the Theosophical Society believes as a society, but I think it's willing to address and to honor anything that has some reality.
Thank you. Dorothy, you want to add something?
Just a brief statement. I'm a Star Trekkie.
I concur.
Anyway, we'll move to the next question. The early Theosophists investigated avant-garde fringe wisdom at the time, like Buddhism and occultism. What cutting-edge fringe knowledge is the TS investigating nowadays?
Well, I think actually today, during our sessions, I think we had a couple of very good examples when Ben was speaking and when Kayla was speaking. Although that's not specifically the Theosophical Society that is sponsoring these sorts of investigations, it's something that is being embraced and is being considered by people who are Theosophists. The effect of visual symbol on consciousness, the effect of sound on consciousness, the fact that consciousness has always been stated to be vibrational and to express itself vibrationally. So these are things that are, it was explored in one way in the 1800s, and of course science now is moving into the same realm. So that's one thing. But I do believe fringe, they talk about the cutting edge. Where we need to be is at the bleeding edge, not just where it's starting to cut. And part of the thing is, and I think this is something that's been emphasized throughout, that there is a body of wisdom that has been, theosophy, one of the definitions, to the extent that it's possible to define it, is the ageless wisdom tested and verified by generations of seers. So there is this wisdom that has the capacity to be experienced. And we have begun in the Theosophical Society's history by presenting its concepts. That's a work that has been very well done. To stay in the conceptual realm is in many ways to stay in the past. The concepts were presented in many ways to address this moment we are in now, where the valuable, the jewel that we can get out of this combination of concepts is an experience. These things are not just to be thought about or to be spoken about. They speak about avenues of experience that are open to anyone who would be willing to be an experiencer. So how do you do that? And when you find these methods, and everybody has, you pursue it. You expand upon it. You keep your mind open to other things which will nuance what it is that you're doing. Because the experience is, in fact, the only thing that's going to be of value to you as an individual, and it's the only thing that will speak to the needs of the moment. Example is not the best way to influence this world. It is the only way.
Just about the whole idea, I think vibrational frequency, I think many more of us are getting our heads out of books, and moving intellectual knowledge, transmuting it by true perception and direct experience. I want to support what Tim was saying. Yeah. So in a sense, our theoretical knowledge, essential as it is, I see it as moving now into the science of direct experience, true perception and direct experience, to applying these great concepts and principles to our own life. And that leads us into experiential learning. It leads us also into understanding a little more about energy, about light energy, in healing and in, for example, I could have said with my father, working from the heart to his heart, a thread of golden thread, and sending the vibration of love to him. I didn't send love to him, I sent the vibration of love to him, and believing that love loves through me, the personality, from the true depths of the divine within. So working with energy may well be opening up as a possibility for some of us anyhow to experiment with and focus on.
Thank you.
I agree with both Tim and Dorothy. I'd only add that there's more of an emphasis now on our third object, which is really exploring ourselves. And it's particularly interesting to see the comment of HPP that our work in the current generation is to explore our psychological nature. So part of exploring who we are is exploring ourselves at a psychological level, and I think I'm seeing much more of that happening within the Theosophical Society now. So the emphasis is not so much anymore on the knowledge, but as Tim says, it's the experiencing of these things to understand who we are ourselves.
Thank you. Question 8. HPB, AP Synod, etc. received information from the Masters. Does the TS receive any new information from the Masters today? And if not, why not?
This just in.
Hang on, checking.
I think just consistent with what I've been trying to say, that to a certain degree, this looking for special inputs, for letters to drop or things like that, there was a time and there was a place for that way of expression. Perhaps this is not that time, but I think the means of expression is very similar, that to the degree that we remove the obstructions, to that degree we find ourselves influenced by this. I hesitate to actually speak in terms of, not to speak in terms of the Masters, I don't hesitate to speak in terms of that, but in terms of our individual influence and connection. Because I have seen in the history of the Theosophical Society, it's a very glamorous idea. And it's one that has been so badly distorted at times that it has become more of a distraction to a connection with the Mahatmas than it has been a source of connection. So I think rather than the emphasis on what have they done for me lately, I think the more appropriate emphasis is perhaps what have I done for them lately? To what degree have I been sufficiently open to be influenced in some way? And I don't have to accredit it to anyone. So I think that's, to me at least in my particular walk, that's a more healthy approach for me.
Thank you. No, we'll move to our next question. This question's quite long. It's directed for Dorothy and the team, so it's for all of them, and it's about the Guardian Wall, and there's quite a long passage in the Voice of the Silence under the 7 portals where they talk about the Guardian Wall. So I'm not going to read the passage because we don't have time. I'll go straight to the questions, and then these questions on this section, these will be the final questions for this session. First question, is this Guardian Wall in existence today? Second, what is known of it? And what is it shielding mankind from? Dorothy.
Boy, I wish Joy Mills were here. Because she did write a little about it. But you're right, the Voice of the Silence is my understanding of the Guardian Wall. And it's, whether it's there today, I just presume so, I don't know. It was set up, in a way, the Adept brothers constituted it, and also there was a role in the TS to also strengthen that Guardian wall. So it's a notional thing. I do not believe that it's a location anywhere. It's an allegory. I believe that word would best fit it. Yeah, an allegory. But it's a protection of humanity. This is my understanding, a protection of humanity from the vilest things that could happen. In other words, we're sheltered by this wall from the extremes of divisiveness, of extremes of fear, the extremes of just destruction, in the sense of our own consequences of our own actions. So, in a way, by saying that we are also have a responsibility to strengthen this wall, and I think the Mahatma K.H. did say, perhaps Mahatma letters, we were talking about it earlier, that the ranks are thinning. The ranks are thinning in the strengthening of the wall through those sources from the adept brothers who have evolved beyond us, as well as from it being part of our work as well, with our positivity and our, if you like, spiritual energies being part of protecting humanity and being part of combating the fear, the negativity, the divisiveness of the world. This is part of our work and our responsibility. That's my understanding.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, most of these things that we read about have a reflection in the world of nature. And the best way I can describe it is perhaps consider the ozone layer around the Earth, which filters the harmful rays of the sun impinging upon the Earth. And most of us here in New Zealand know that for many years there's been a hole in the ozone layer over New Zealand, which has made it very hard for people to spend more than 20 or 30 minutes in the sun before they get burnt, and they've exposed themselves to melanoma, skin cancer. Luckily, it's closed now, apparently, so it's not happening. But the consequences of the ozone layer becoming exposed or opening up is what they call the carbon dioxide, which we humans have been putting into the atmosphere. So there's a link there, and we're not doing anything much seriously about that at the moment. So it's the same with, what is it called? The
Guardian Wall.
The Guardian Wall. Are we helping to create this Guardian Wall by our own thoughts that we're putting into the atmosphere? So we are very powerful beings when you consider what our thoughts can actually do. If our thoughts are negative, they affect the people around us, the people that we focus those thoughts on. But if our thoughts are positive and loving, a little bit like what Helen explained last night as part of her meditation process, to live in a loving atmosphere all the time affects all those people around us. So I think my perspective is that this is what this Guardian Wall is sort of alluding to. I can't say I profess to know a great deal about it, but this is what comes to me at this time.
Thank you. One final comment, Tim, before we close. Did you want to add to that one?
I think
We're covered.
No, I think that John and Dorothy have discussed it well. I would just see it as, when they talk about the Guardian Wall, very often you might even be able to think of it as anyone who has been a parent and there is a child. Little children run around and do crazy things that could be harmful to themselves. And in the absence of someone to just guide them slightly in another direction, they do great damage to themselves very often. So I think this almost parental role of protecting us from the results of the various karmas we do create has been something that has been attempted, but it can only go so far. Obviously, just like with the child, they grow, and there's a responsibility that they must assume for themselves. And then, however loving a parent you may be, you become aware that they're on a path to bump their head and there's nothing you can do about it. And so this is the responsibility for us, and this is the responsibility that I think the great ones have assumed in trying to shepherd this very childish humanity into a new era.
Thank you. We've covered 9 questions and it's 5:20, so can we give thanks to our very wise panel? Thank you.